Watching News at Prime, let's bring you this now. United States President Donald Trump says, quote-unquote, very good talks have been held with Iran, raising hopes for a possible end to the over 3-week-long Middle East conflict. He's since instructed the Pentagon to postpone all military strikes against Iranian power plants and energy facilities for a period of 5 days. Trump gave Tehran until Tuesday to open the Strait of Hormuz or face action. He says the decision is subject to the success of ongoing negotiations. The announcement had an immediate impact on oil prices, which tumbled. Now, the global markets also ending the day on the up. Meanwhile, Iran has denied any dialogue with Washington, dismissing Trump's claims as an attempt to lower energy prices and buy time for military plans. Well, let's get the context now and the latest developments here. And we speak to our Washington correspondent, Simon Marks. Simon, good evening to you. Thank you very much for your time. I think the question really is this simple. Who is President Trump talking to Iran?
Well, it is a very, very good question, Xoli, and it has been a head-spinning morning here in Washington, D.C., even by local standards, because we all woke up this morning thinking that tonight was the night when President Trump was going to give the Pentagon orders to begin destroying Iran's power and energy infrastructure based on that 48-hour deadline that he set on Saturday for Iran to free up navigation in the Strait of Hormuz, the strategic waterway through which 20% of the world's oil and gas passes on its way to international markets. And instead, we woke up to find a surprise. President Trump taking to social media to reveal that 2 days of talks had been underway with what he defined as the country of Iran. Didn't say who those talks had been with, said they'd been very productive, that he wanted to give them more time to bear fruit. And so he was kicking the idea of launching those airstrikes on Iran's energy facilities down the road until the end of the week. Now, in the last few hours, there have been reports here that outreach has been underway between the president's special envoy, Steve Witkoff, and his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, and the Speaker of the Iranian Parliament, Mohammad Khalibaf, a figure in Iran who is no stranger to South Africa. He's traveled to South Africa on at least 2 occasions, attending BRICS events in Johannesburg back in 2023 and again in 2024. He's no stranger to the Iranian public either. At times, he has couched himself as something of a reformist. At other times, he's couched himself very much on the hard line of Iran's political spectrum, aligning himself with the late supreme leader, the Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. Now, Mr. Khalibaf has taken to his social media account to deny that he's been engaged in conversations with the Americans. But there are indications that when he says that, he means that he hasn't been involved in direct talks with Mr. Witkoff and Mr. Kushner, and that instead perhaps these conversations, as the talks that were taking place in Geneva before this joint US and Israeli military action against Iran began, perhaps the talks have been taking place through third-party intermediaries. There certainly seems to be a suggestion that there may be some kind of a meeting between the Speaker of Iran's parliament and representatives of the Trump administration, possibly in Islamabad, in Pakistan, possibly by the end of the week. But all of this very uncertain, and uncertain too is precisely whether Iran has agreed to any change of behavior with regard to the Strait of Hormuz. And remember, it was the standoff over the Strait of Hormuz that set in train the events that led President Trump to threaten Iran's power and energy infrastructure. And yet, in the president's statement this morning, he didn't make a single mention of the Strait of Hormuz.
Simon, let's conclude the conversation on this point, because President Trump, as we watch him, he is someone who's very conscious of market reaction. And here's a basis for saying that. The Venezuelan action took place on a Friday and very late at night. And it was ostensibly to make sure that as the markets go to a close, there isn't really much disruption in the markets. The action on Iran also took place on a Friday night so that we could wake up on the weekend and there is this big headline. But the markets, once again, trying to make sure that they don't react negatively. Now Iran is the country saying this, that all of this is in order to manipulate the market so that oil prices come down. And true to form, indeed, the oil prices have come down. How much pressure is on President Trump domestically about this war and its domestic impact?
Enormous pressure and growing pressure, Xoli. And, the flip side of the coin, Friday night events is what took place here today, which was a Monday morning announcement by the president just 2 hours before the markets opened in New York. And at the time that the announcement was being made, there was alarm in some parts of the Trump administration over the rise in 10-year Treasury bond yields, which was edging up towards 4.5%, a very unwelcome figure from the perspective of the US Treasury, and exactly the figure last April that led the president to row back from some of the most punitive tariffs that he had announced. So by making this announcement this morning, the 10-year Treasury yield immediately fell back to more propitious territory from the US administration's perspective. And when trading got underway on Wall Street, the Dow Jones immediately leapt by 800 points, almost 1.75 percentage points in value being restored to the markets. And indeed, so lacking is President Trump's credibility here now, after we've seen so many inconsistencies in the claims and the statements that he's made about Iran over the last few days. One morning he's talking about winding down the military action. Then we learn he's sending another 2,500 Marines to the battlefield, possibly to prepare for some kind of limited ground presence of troops, boots on the ground in Iran. So tremendous inconsistencies. And so when that news was announced this morning that there'd been a weekend of talks taking place, many here in Washington questioned whether it was even true or whether it was simply an effort to beat back at the difficulties on the markets and also the difficulties in the opinion polls that the president is facing. There was a new CBS poll out over the weekend showing that 57% of the country either somewhat disapproved or strongly disapproved of the president's military campaign in Iran. So he's definitely a man looking for an off-ramp from this conflict. He didn't find one last week, but maybe with these reported talks that are underway with the Speaker of the Iranian Parliament, the stage is set for a possible off-ramp and de-escalation further down the line.
Interesting indeed. Simon Marks, thank you very much for that update. Live